realize that was your job.
I promise I'll be quiet. Daniel, is there a single moment at which you think Israel is justified in carrying out military intervention against one of the enemies that are facing it, Hamas, Hezbollah, or Iran? Is there a single instance?
Yes, but I do not think that Israel is going to succeed militarily.
But what is
if the premise of its position is we will continue to manage a permanent illegal occupation against the Palestinians.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Genuinely glad you're here for this one because this clip had me rewinding multiple times. So what you're about to watch is a panel debate where Doron Spielman, a former Israeli military spokesman, goes head-to-head with Daniel Levy, a former Israeli negotiator who sits on the completely opposite end of the political spectrum. And right in the middle of it all, Scott Horton jumps in with a wildly different argument that takes the whole conversation somewhere nobody expected. The topic is whether Israel's military actions are justified, and the moment Daniel is forced to answer one direct question, the entire debate shifts. Stick with this all the way through because the last few minutes are where things get genuinely uncomfortable in a way that will have you thinking long after the video ends. Before we get into it, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from. I always love seeing where this community comes from, and it genuinely means a lot to see those responses. All right, let's get into it.
Just answer the simple question. Do you consider the fact that Iran has funded and trained Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis to kill Israelis an offense?
So
are they actually attacking Israel, or are they
listen.
some parallel vertical regime? What's your answer?
Here's my response. I would consider it highly problematic if the response to Israel's genocide against the Palestinians, if the response to Israel being led by a war criminal with an international criminal court arrest warrant against his name, if the response to that would be an attempt to wipe the Israeli Jewish community off the map. Israel is a nuclear. Israel is a nuclear.
Daniel, you're sidestepping it. Daniel, is there any point at which you think Israel is justified in carrying out military intervention at all? Wait, give me one instance. Is there any moment? Is there anyone?
You see, when you can't, if you can't listen to a response to your argument,
Daniel,
are we just going to shout over each other?
No, I'm trying to ask you a real question because I don't understand your answer.
Can you shut up and I'll answer Piers' question?
Daniel, take it easy. Take it easy now. We don't have to get overly upset.
Well, I think this is...
Okay, Daniel, let Daniel answer the question. Let Daniel answer the question.
So I think the fact that Israel has maintained control of the sovereign skies of Lebanon, violated Lebanese sovereignty for decades, the fact that Israel has maintained a vicious, violent occupation against the Palestinians does not mean that the solution is a military solution. I think we should eschew and avoid war. And war in this instance was avoidable. Iran was manageable, not through kinetic military means. I don't think this is going to make the Jewish population of Israel or anywhere else even safer. I think quite the opposite. It will be more dangerous. Israel is going to have to step back from its illegal criminal activity. Iran should step back from its illegal criminal activity. And I would suggest that the way to do that is not by bombing schools, whether they're in Gaza, in Israel, or in Iran. I would suggest the way you do that is you pursue other options. And if anyone told me that Israel as a nuclear power, which has attacked Iran, not been attacked by Iran, where Iran's so-called proxies were more of a deterrence than an offense, that Israel is more than capable of handling itself militarily, but apparently absolutely incapable of handling itself politically and of having a diplomatic game.
It sounds like you're defending Iran and persecuting Israel.
Sorry, I'm not defending Iran, but it sounds a heck of a lot like you're defending Israeli genocide.
I just want to ask you one question.
To you, Mr.
Daniel, is there a single
are
moment,
you ashamed and are you against the Israeli genocide?
Daniel, I'm trying to ask a question. Can I just ask one question?
Sorry, I didn't realize that was your job.
I promise I'll be quiet. Daniel, is there a single moment at which you think Israel is justified in carrying out military intervention against one of the enemies that are facing it, Hamas, Hezbollah, or Iran? Is there a single instance?
Yes, but I do not think that Israel is going to succeed militarily
But what is
if
it?
The premise of its position is we will continue to manage a permanent illegal occupation against.
Okay. This is where the entire debate cracks open. Because Doron came out with one question that should have been unanswerable. He said this: just answer the simple question. Do you consider the fact that Iran has funded and trained Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis to kill Israelis? That was not a debating trick. That was Doron forcing Daniel to take a real position. No more hiding behind academic framing. And Daniel's response was this: I would consider it highly problematic. That phrase alone tells you everything. Highly problematic. You have a nation funding armed groups across multiple countries for decades with the specific goal of targeting civilians in a neighboring state. And the most this debate could produce in response was highly problematic. That is the intellectual equivalent of calling a fire slightly warm. But here's what frustrated me watching this. Daniel kept building a case around what Israel has done wrong. And look, honest criticism of any government's actions is fair. That is part of real political debate. But there is a logic trap happening here that people miss. When you spend the entire conversation cataloging one side's wrongs while refusing to assign any clear responsibility to the other side, you are not being balanced. You are redistributing blame to avoid a conclusion. Daniel argued that war was avoidable and that Iran was manageable through non-military means. The 2015 diplomatic agreement was built on exactly that assumption, that direct engagement would pull Iran toward moderation. And what actually happened? The proxy networks kept operating. The missile development continued. The regional destabilization did not slow down. That is not opinion. That is the documented record of what followed. Then Doron asked the question that broke everything open. He said, is there a single moment at which Israel is justified in carrying out military intervention? Is there a single instance? And Daniel said, yes, after everything, after all of it, yes.
The Palestinians. If you
I understand,
can't,
but we weren't
sorry, because you are therefore in a belligerent state in the region. Israel has bombed several countries in the region. Israel hasn't tried the other path.
What should we have done after October 7th, Daniel?
Let me bring in
before October 7th.
Right.
No, but what
gentlemen,
after they attacked us, the question?
Gentlemen, I'm just going to call a timeout. Let me call a timeout because Scott has been waiting very patiently. Scott, look, there are passionate arguments on all sides of this. Of course there are. Do you have any sympathy with Israel's clear? Look, there's a massive majority support for this in Israel, for what's happening in Iran, because the Israeli people have reached a general consensus that they believe Iran has been responsible for most of their problems in the last few decades, with these proxy terror groups just constantly trying to attack them. And that has caused this massive security crisis, as they see it, which has to be somehow brought to an end. Do you have any sympathy with the way the average Israeli feels about this and why they're supporting this?
Well, I understand it, just the same as if you swapped them out with any other nation in the world in the same position, if there was such a situation. It's fine, but it has nothing to do with the United States. And this goes back to a falsehood that Danny Danon said earlier in your show, where he was claiming that ever since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, Iran has been at war with Israel this way. But that's not true. Israel stayed friends with Iran all through the 1980s. As everyone knows, when Ronald Reagan switched sides in the Iran-Iraq war for a minute and sold weapons to the Ayatollah, he used the Israelis as the cutout because they had the ongoing operation. And I highly suggest everyone, especially you, Pierce, read this fantastic book by Trita Parsi called Treacherous Alliance, about the real history of America, Israel, and Iran's relationship throughout that period. And where he shows that it was in 1993 when Yitzhak Rabin simply changed his strategy and Israel turned on Iran, and Iran started funding Hamas after that. And now after Rabin was killed, the Likud basically took up the same policy of demonizing Iran, but instead of using it as an excuse for dealing with the Palestinians, they used it as an excuse to distract from the fact that they were going to never deal with the Palestinians in good faith. But it was the Israelis who turned on the Iranians first, and that wasn't until 1993. And Parsi even has Clinton administration officials laughing because the Israelis are demanding that America be hard on Iran, when 1 week ago they were taking Iran's side in the very same type arguments and all that. The book is called Treacherous Alliance. It's absolutely fantastic.
That yes landed like a confession in real time. And what happened right after, it is just as important as the word itself. Because Daniel immediately tried to walk it back. He said he did not think Israel was going to succeed militarily if the premise was continuing an occupation against the Palestinians. You have to understand what that argument structure is actually doing. He is not saying Israel cannot defend itself. He is saying Israel has forfeited the right to defend itself because of separate political failures elsewhere. That is a much more extreme position than it sounds on the surface, and it is a standard that is not applied to any other nation on earth. When Doron followed with, "What should we have done after October 7th?" there was no clean answer, just more deflection back to prior conditions. That question is not rhetorical. It is the most honest question in the whole debate, and the fact that Daniel's framework cannot answer it tells you exactly where the framework breaks. Then Piers raised something that deserves more attention than it got. He pointed out that there is massive majority support inside Israel for this position, because when a population reaches a broad consensus after years of sustained attacks through proxy networks, that is not manufactured opinion. That is people responding to a real lived experience that matters. Then Scott stepped in and said, "This has nothing to do with the United States." Fine. That is a coherent position on its own. But then he went further, claiming the entire narrative of Iran being hostile to Israel since 1979 is inaccurate. His argument was that Israel and Iran were working together through much of the 1980s and that Israel turned against Iran first. Now look, this is actually one of the more interesting historical claims in the entire debate. Scott is not completely wrong about the complexity of that relationship during that period, but the conclusion he draws from it, that the current conflict is therefore entirely manufactured, is where the logic gets shaky. Historical complexity does not erase current reality, and the current reality is documented.
It shows all that. And then this is also crucially the basis for the argument in the clean break strategy by David Wormser and Richard Pearl in 1996 when Benjamin Netanyahu was first coming to office the first time. These are American neoconservatives who wrote this policy that says the clean break is with Oslo, said we're never going to deal with the Palestinians. We're going to take what they have. But in order to be able to get away with that, we need a whole new position of dominance in the region. And in order to do that, our first priority is we have to break the arch of power between Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah. And they said the way we want to do that is by getting rid of Saddam Hussein, which sounds insane, and it is. He was the Sunni roadblock in this Shiite arc of power here. But they thought that Turkey and Jordan would be dominant in the new Iraq, and then they would get the Iraqi Shiites to tell Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran and start making nice with Israel. It's called the clean break, a new strategy for securing the realm.
Okay.
And the partner companion piece is called Coping with Crumbling States. And this is the naive pipe dream of the neoconservatives and the Likud. And this was the policy behind Iraq War II, which Netanyahu, of course, championed, and his neoconservative fifth column in America championed, and which backfired and only resulted in America fighting an 8-year war to install Iran's best friends from Dawa and the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in power there, and to build their militias into the Iraqi army. And as I said, Iraq War III against the Caliphate also was literally for Iran and their friends on the ground. When the Iranian Quds Force liberated Tikrit from ISIS, they had American airplanes flying overhead. And all this just goes to show All this just goes to show the vast divergence of interests between Israel and the United States. And one more point here, and I'll be quiet and you guys can keep arguing for the rest of the show. But we already on the first day had a blowback terrorist attack from Israel's war in my hometown of Austin, Texas. And 3 innocent people were murdered by a Muslim immigrant who went down to the bar. Yeah, you wipe that smile off your face real quick there, Mr. Israeli spokesman. Murdered 3 of my hometown
I think it's horrible. Why would I smile when you got a Muslim that's killing a bunch of Americans?
Shut your damn mouth while I'm talking. And there was also an attempted bombing attack at the American embassy in Norway last night. And Americans are already dying and suffering blowback terrorism from another war on behalf of Israel. Just like Omar Mateen's slaughter in Orlando, just like San Bernardino,
Scott, I've got to jump in.
Blowback from Israel's foreign policy.
Okay. I just want to end very quickly with you, Doron, if I may. I'm looking at the prediction markets, poly market.
Scott then went into a documented 1996 policy framework, a real strategy paper that argued for reshaping the Middle East, breaking specific regional alliances, and repositioning influence across the area. And the argument that those policies produced serious unintended consequences over the following 2 decades is not a fringe claim. The outcomes of that period are on the record, and they were not what the architects expected. But then Scott made the move that undercut everything that came before it. He said this: "We already on the first day had a blowback attack from Israel's war in his hometown of Austin, Texas, and then followed it with this. Americans are already dying and suffering blowback terrorism from another war on behalf of Israel. This is the part that genuinely concerns me. Not the emotion behind it. Scott clearly means it. But the logic. What Scott is doing is taking violent acts committed by individuals and attributing them directly to a foreign policy decision. That reasoning, if you apply it consistently, means that anytime a country makes a security decision that someone finds provocative, the resulting violence becomes the policy's fault, not the person who carried it out. That removes individual accountability entirely from the equation. Here is what people do not realize about that argument historically. It was used during the Cold War to argue against confronting Soviet expansion because it would provoke retaliation. It was used to argue against multiple security commitments throughout the 20th century, and every time that logic became the primary reason for inaction, the result was not reduced conflict. It was emboldened aggression. That is not opinion, that is the documented pattern. Doron's refusal to accept that framing in that moment was significant because the underlying claim Scott was making, that Americans' suffering is a consequence of standing with an ally, is designed to make the alliance itself feel like the problem. And once you accept that framing, you have removed the foundation for any collective security relationship. Every attack becomes an argument for retreat. Every casualty becomes leverage. Scott ended by saying Americans are dying on behalf of Israel, but collective defense is not charity. The stability of that region touches global energy supply, shipping lanes, and economic systems that affect households across America directly. That is not a sentiment. That is documented economic geography. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.